The Just Lead Advancing Racial Equity Conference, hosted by New Detroit, brought together national and local speakers who provided compelling insights into racial equity and justice. Khary Fraiser, Detroit is Different, provides you conversations with some of the phenomenal guests, talking dismantling racism with collaborative solutions.
Rebecca Irby, Just Lead 2023.
Detroit is different here at the Just Lead Conference 2023 for New Detroit, and here with somebody that definitely knows the ins and outs of New Detroit, leading in research and so many other things, and also returning to Detroit is Different. Rebecca, how are you?
Oh, so good to be back. So happy you're here with us again this year. So thank you for making the time and the space to do these interviews. Very much appreciated.
Definitely. So, because you in this mix, I got to hit you with the heavyweight stuff. It's going to be a little bit stuff, but definitely heavy,
All right, let's go. You know I love it.
I definitely know. I definitely know. So this work definitely shares all of what can come from the benefits of racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's been proven in data points. It's been proven by real-life examples, practical examples, and it's also been proven just in, people that, cultures that do exist as it moves forward. But as much as that is happening, it's also a lot of people that profit from the divisions of race. It's organizations, it's people that, wave the banner for these organizations and things like that. So in this work, what's the response to that? What is the response to the people that are fighting against things like racial equity? Is the response to ignore it at times? Is the response to combat it at times? Is the response to look to educate and train some of these people at times? How do you go about that?
Yes. The answer is yes to all of the above. You have to do all of it. It's a very complicated and embedded, insidious situation that we're trying to unmantle. Right? So the way that you unmantle something, the way that you're working to dismantle embedded systems, it has to have multiple approaches because it's in multiple different places, and the way, there's not one approach that's going to work for everything. So that's why I said, yes, we have to do all of what you said and more, and a lot more, actually. So there's, if we think about, and what I loved that came out yesterday that I don't get to talk about a lot, is this understanding that if we want to see progress, we need to adopt an abolitionist frame. And once we do that and we start to work from that framework, because it's a formula, and it's one that has worked over time in multiple different issues, but when we go back to that and we see the way that the abolitionists were working, that gives us a roadmap and a blueprint for what we need to do today.
All right, and like I say, definitely, I can come on the heavy with you. So let me go to another one. And I've asked this from a couple of different perspectives, but being that your experience in research, looking at that analysis and then structures and policies, affirmative action, pivotal legislative ruling aimed at addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion challenges. And since then, a lot has changed this summer with affirmative action. So something that stood for 62 years, something from the Kennedy administration, looks to already be under the winds of change from the lens of what's happened in academia. I bring this up to say, looking ahead and moving forward, what's that relationship you see with policy and politicians, where something more substantive, something more impactful can be designed?
Exactly.
And where do politicians stand at in this role? Or do you see them as the architects? Do you see them as people listening? Do you see them as partners? How does that look?
So and thank you. I'm a policy geek, so I'm like, okay, let's dig in.
Yes.
So when we think about policy and the way that it actually gets created, politicians, they can champion policy. Every now and then you have a politician who's really into policy and they might write a bill or help get it started. But most often, the the bills and the legislation that have sweeping changes, it comes from the people. And so, for example, the bills and legislation and policies that I've worked on, some of them were brought to us by children, literal middle schoolers who wanted to see a change. So in New York City, the campaign that I worked on that divested $470 million, that was started by a 12-year-old. She went to the library and started doing research and was like, I think we can do this. Have y'all looked at this? And everyone was like, all of the adults were like, where did you find that? What, excuse me, what? So yes, it's us who has the power to make policy. When we partner with politicians and get them to champion the policies that we're creating, that's when you see it starting to move forward and get legs under it. And then the piece that's almost always missing when this happens is that national or international campaign that talks about said policy and the mental changes, the mindset changes that have to take place in order for that policy to actually have any chance of having the impact that it's meant to have.
So with that, I'm gonna definitely piggyback and go straight back at that affirmative action question. So many iterations, and it was always very, very much a discussion when it comes to a lot of conservatives and Republican perspective of what it is and what it means. And even, just being honest, from a lot of people looking at who were the beneficiaries of affirmative action and data points and analysis and practical examples prove that it was a lot of white women that did receive a lot of the benefits connected to the affirmative action policies. But I think that happened over time as like no one could expect for that. So looking at that, what can we learn in organizing for racial equity from affirmative action's whole journey from 1961 to what just happened in the summer of 2023?
So a long history to cover. No, so with affirmative action, there are many points where the Supreme Court has either strengthened but mostly has taken away kind of the power of that bill. So when I think about and look at things like affirmative action, are there other avenues and other ways for us to start thinking more creatively about how we want to see those impacts? Now, affirmative action was incredible, but there were some pitfalls with it, and it was eroded over time, as with the Voting Rights Act. Very similar things happening. What's on the docket at the Supreme Court right now, it's not getting a lot of airtime, and it's not getting people aren't talking about it, but there's a huge voting rights bill on the docket right now set for the end of this month that we need to be looking at as well. So when I see things like this, yesterday what we heard about, and we were talking a lot about how the Constitution is actually ripe with all of this information. So conservatives love holding up the Constitution and saying, well, this isn't in that. You can't do this. These are the documents we're going back to. So when I see that, I'm like, okay, let's go back there then. Let's talk about that Constitution and what's actually in it and what it actually means, because that's where this all stems from. So I love to have those conversations, and that's where I think we really need to start focusing and understanding that what we're actually fighting against is entrenched into that Constitution, and if you want to see changes, we need to start making amendments, not just policies, because we're seeing policies, they get overturned very easily. So when those are the types of things I look to. People are like, that's really difficult. Yeah, it is. It's really difficult to get an amendment. Absolutely. But
I like it.
That's the hard work. And it's not difficult if you have everybody on board.
So thinking beyond, so what we learn from affirmative action is an act can always, you can poke holes in the act. You can change things around. And especially when we look at a span of 62 years, God knows that, it may have, the way it grew up by the time it reaches the chance so that it can get Social Security, which I'm pretty sure that's going to be something on the docket. So it looks completely different.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's in that Constitution, That's one of the iterations that we need to look for when we're organizing. Hence, we need to inform people that this is the way that we need to be thinking about racial equity being a part of this discussion, so
Yes.
that we're taking away some of those arguments. We're taking away some of what could be. And then furthermore, I do like what you said. It's really informing the public to know what it is, so no one's blindsided. Because even with what you said about the Rights Act and many things, most times people are not thinking about the Supreme Court until a ruling is made that day.
Yeah.
And
And
I
then
don't want to say it's too late, but in a
it
lot of
is.
ways,
At that point, it is.
it's very late.
It's yeah. It's never too late to make change and to impact things. But when we see things at the Supreme Court, there's a huge fight that needs to have been happening years before, in all honesty. So the things that are coming to the Supreme Court, if you watch the docket, especially the shadow docket, which is the one they don't want you to see, that's the most important one. Check that one out. The fact that we even have something called the shadow docket. I mean, all of this, again, goes back to the legacy of slavery and the way that we were founded, but almost no one knows that, these pieces. So it's about informing folks, because knowledge is power. Once we have that knowledge and we understand that we truly have the power. So one thing that came out yesterday was that over 80% of the book bans that have happened in this country were from 11 people that have affected the entire nation. So they've been drawn around to state creating these bans. To me, that's wildly exciting. To think that 11 people could do that. It's awful what they're doing, but that also says, if we organize ourselves, what could we do?
Yeah.
Like, there's so much opportunity, there's so much power in organizing. So there's an incredible, it's like a very short pamphlet. I think it was even an essay, but Organizing Means Commitment by Grace Lee Boggs. Highly recommend checking that out.
There we go. And she shout out Grace, another friend of, rest in peace, but definitely ally and big homie of so many people I know, and powerful when it comes to bringing about change and, as she would say, evolution.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And she got it. She understood the interconnectivity. Even some of her essays about the whales and the water, she was a true visionary.